I love distorted electric guitars. They really make me feel something. There's just something powerful and rebellious about that sound. But if they're not mixed correctly, they can present a lot of problems. They can muddy up the mix, they can sound harsh and piercing, they can overtake the vocal because they sound so out of control. So in this video, I'm sharing some key frequency ranges, and I'll end the video with 4 tips to help you get started. Let's break it down. So our first key frequency area is the mid-range, and this really gives a lot of fullness. This can be found around 1.5K to 800. And if you take away 1K, you just get the opposite of more of like a hollowed sound. Remember, these key frequency ranges are just starting points. Yes, boosting mids will give you fullness, but the more important question is, does this song, does this track need more fullness? So the next key frequency range is the high mids. So boosting this area gives you a lot of brightness and aggression, 2K to maybe 4K-ish area. And if you take that away, it starts to become more dull, and go too far, it starts to not cut through the mix. Okay, so our next range, I'm gonna call highs. In my mind, this is like 5K to 8K kind of range. So when you boost this range, it also gives you brightness, but more in a sizzly way. So it brings out a lot of excitement, it brings the guitars forward in a way, but in more of that kind of sizzly thing. Really, when you get above kind of 10K on the guitar, there's not much information. It's more kind of noise. So sometimes, depending on how clean you want the high end, you might want to take away that area, leave it for the cymbals, or if it's not really bothering, you can leave the energy in. Don't make it a rule that you always have to cut the air stuff on the guitar, because sometimes it sounds better leaving it in. Let's jump all the way down to the opposite end of the spectrum. We're going to talk about everything below 80. Oftentimes, this stuff gets in the way of the bass. How thin you want to make the guitar also depends on how separated or glued you want the guitars to be with the bass. Again, don't make it a rule of thumb to cut this area. Let's look at the lows now. 100, 200, that kind of range. This range really gives the guitar a lot of body. But keep in mind, your bass might also be living in that area, so this is where you need to find the balance. Okay, our last key frequency range is the low mids, 300 to 500 hertz. And to be honest, I rarely boost this area. If you have too little of this area, it's gonna sound quite thin, but having too much of this area makes it muddy really quickly. So hopefully that helps you attach some musical term to the key frequency range. And to me, that's really what mixing is about. Because at the end of the day, we're using sound to bring out the musical qualities in the track we're working on. And if you want a free resource on how to better understand EQ and compression, the proper order, believe it or not, there's a right and a wrong order to EQ things. You can find all of that and more in our free EQ and compression cheat sheet in the description below. So my first practical tip is not to boost everything that you see on this list of key frequency ranges. Just because we've identified musical terms that go along with these frequency ranges doesn't mean that your guitar track needs all of them. In this section, there's a solo electric guitar. The wrong thing to do would be like, do I want body? Yes. Do I want fullness? Yes. Do I want brightness and aggression? Yes. Do I want sizzly brightness? Wow, sounds good, impressive. And then you put it in the mix. Sounds a bit like everything is. That's not the way to go. So let's do it properly. So instead of boosting all the attributes because on paper they sound good, we need to think in context. First, ask yourself, what characteristics are missing? Or what characteristics do you desire? Then go boost it. Does it need a bit more body? I think it can. It's a bit small at the moment. It definitely needs some fullness. It's the solo, it should really stick out. You might think, okay, I want brightness and aggression because it's the solo, right? Shouldn't it really cut through? But actually, if you listen to it, it's already quite bright. It's not missing that attribute. Yeah, much better. So we've achieved what we're looking out for. We've helped it cut through. It sounds fuller, it sounds warm. By doing it in this order, not only have we enhanced the musical qualities in this guitar, but actually, this guitar now sounds good with the other guitars that we mixed because we've helped them kind of separate in frequency and together they sound fuller, which is my second tip. When you're EQing multiple electric guitars, don't just think of the guitar you're EQing on its own. It needs to play a complementary role with the other instruments, but also the other guitars that you're stacking on top. Because guitars are so powerful, if you start boosting them all in similar areas, those frequency ranges can get really overpowering. And if it's the high mids that are overlapping, it can get harsh really quickly. When you're enhancing the musical qualities you want, pay attention to how it complements the other guitars. And maybe that means going back and adjusting what you've done to make room for guitars that are more important, aka the solo. And so my third practical tip is dealing with harshness in distorted electric guitars. Sometimes you'll get these kind of like resonant high mid frequencies that poke out that make the guitar sound piercing rather than powerful, bright, and aggressive in a pleasing way. I'm going to use a more surgical EQ here. To me, this range is not very pleasing. What not to do is completely cut it. And then, you know, we can hear another one higher up. And so if you do the same, nice and warm, but check it out in the mix. It's kind of disappeared. So my tip is not to completely remove the harsh frequencies, it's to balance them. Just take away what you need. You can hear that that frequency is still there. It's just not jumping out as much. And so context becomes really important. So don't do this in solo. Yes, you can find and identify it in solo, but deciding how much to take out, do it in context. So speaking of context, the last tip I have is how does the guitar relate to the vocals? In every song that has vocals, the vocal is the king. The question is, how dominant is this king? Is he the real star of the show, everyone get out of the way like a pop song? Or does it lean more like a rock song where the guitars are kind of like rebellious? So he is the king, he is the most important, but the guitars are trying to rebel. So I would say this is an example of the vocal is the king, but the guitars are rebelling. But if we were to give the vocal a bit more space, it would probably sound a bit like this. And that last point ties everything together. Mixing is really about context. It's not about the electric guitars sounding powerful on their own. In fact, they probably sound powerful because they're working well with the things around them. The vocal, the bass, the guitars that are layered on top of each other, the cymbals. And when everything works together, the end result is, wow, the guitars are powerful, they're aggressive, but they're never piercing, they're not overpowering the mix. And when done right, it really gives you the feeling of. So if that has helped you, remember to like the video and share it with a friend whose guitars are weak and piercing, and subscribe for more mixing content, and I'll see you in the next one.